From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
President Biden pardons his son, Hunter Biden, after a family retreat over the Thanksgiving holiday. What is the political fallout, especially since the president had insisted he would never do this? And what message does it send to Americans about equal justice under the law? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I'm here with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. Let's talk about the Biden pardon. Came Sunday evening, late, and was startling, not really in the sense that we didn't expect here at the Journal the president to pardon his son. We certainly did. We wrote that. But he had insisted he would never do it. So let's listen to the president first, talk about that, and also then White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre responding to multiple questions on the point from the press.
As we sit here in Normandy, your son Hunter is on trial, and I know that you cannot speak about an ongoing federal prosecution. But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
You have.
I'm extremely proud of my son Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know, and I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Second one, will the president pardon or commute his son if he's convicted?
So I've answered this question before. It was asked of me not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I was very clear, and I said no.
Is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No.
His son, Hunter, is also up for being sentenced next month. Does the president have any intention of pardoning him?
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
The president would not pardon or commute the sentence for his son, Hunter. I just want to make sure that that is not going to change over the next 6 months. The president's saying it would not.
It's still a no. It's still a no.
It will always be a no.
It's still a no. It will be a no. It is a no, and I don't have anything else to add. Will he pardon his son? No.
He will not pardon his son until he pardons his son. Tough job being White House press secretary. You have to say things that ultimately turn out not to be true. But Kim, were you surprised at this? And what do you make of it?
No, I was not surprised. Even though this president has spent many years saying that he gives his word as a Biden, there is no question that family trumps all for him. And even as this was going along, and even if he'd won re-election, I assumed that he was going to issue a pardon. Two things really stick out to me when you look at this pardon specifically. One is the somewhat sweeping nature of it, too. I can't think of any other pardon except for maybe the one issued to Nixon in 1974 that was this sweeping in nature.
In other words, this is not a pardon only for the gun charges and the tax charges. This is beyond that.
It is blanket immunity for anything that Hunter Biden did for 10 years. It ranges from January 2014 through December 1st, 2024, so 10 years, and it is full and unconditional. So what makes that different is that normally when presidents issue a pardon, they will lay out a specific crime for which somebody was indicted and jailed or sentenced, and they will say you are being pardoned for that specific crime. In this particular case, Biden is saying anything that Hunter Biden did over this period of time, he cannot be prosecuted for. I've already absolved him of any liability for it. That was the one thing was how sweeping. But secondly, those dates are very telling as well, too. As noted, it begins on January 2014. It was in April of 2014 that Hunter Biden joined the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company, which looks to be one of his first big forays into peddling his family's influence to get jobs. And it stretches all the way up until 2 days ago.
Yeah, it is incredibly sweeping, just to cite the language in the pardon that the White House released, for those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through December 1st, 2024. So it's pretty clear, Kyle, that this doesn't merely erase the gun and tax convictions, but I mean, it's basically saying we're not sure if the incoming Trump administration is going to go after Hunter for anything, and I want to prevent that.
Yeah, it's a totally clean slate, and the end date of December 1, 2024, I think is particularly interesting, given that we've been told that Hunter has been on this straight and narrow now for some years, and, let's hope that's true. Good for him if it is. The experts who have looked at this are saying that, there's not open-ended language like this in most pardons, maybe the exception being President Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon. Here is Margaret Love, who is the U.S. pardon attorney from 1990 to 1997. She says, I have never seen language like this in a pardon document that purports to pardon offenses that have not apparently even been charged, with the exception of the Nixon pardon. Even the broadest Trump pardons were specific as to what was being pardoned. And so if this is a new precedent, which is what often happens in cases like this, one president does something that pushes the bounds, that sets a precedent, and the next president then carries it forward, it suggests that the pardon power might be used in more broad fashion than it has in recent years.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about what really happened with the Hunter Biden plea deal that blew up in court when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. So why'd the president do this? Clearly, he wants to prevent any future prosecution, but he also wants to prevent Hunter from going to prison. He was scheduled to be sentenced here in a couple of weeks, I guess, and could have served up to 20 years in prison. Most everybody expected it would be much less than that, first-time offender. But I want to read from the president's statement on Sunday night. So the charges in his case came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. Then a carefully negotiated plea deal agreed to by the Department of Justice unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. Had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases, unquote. So the president here, Kim, is basically saying, I did this because Hunter was unfairly prosecuted. He said elsewhere that nobody else, if it hadn't been for a president's son, would have been subject to anything like these serious charges. And before we take up the reason the plea deal fell apart, let's take up that question first about the unfairness that he claims was involved here in charging Hunter. I think you do not agree with that.
Yeah, it's complete, as the president would say, malarkey. I think that's one of his favorite words. Look, Hunter stood convicted, I should say, not just accused, but convicted by a jury of his peers of tax evasion, felony tax evasion. And because of whistleblowers who came forward to Congress and because of oversight activity conducted by House Republicans, we have a very good sense of what happened over periods of years. Hunter Biden used his family's name to land jobs. Great deals of money came in. They were shuffled around in a number of corporations. This seemed to be used with the purpose of avoiding paying very hefty tax bills.
Several millions of dollars.
Several millions of dollars. Well, taxes on millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. Separately, he went and signed a federal form saying that he had not used drugs when he went to go purchase a firearm. That was clearly a lie. He looks to have been an addict at the time he was doing it. There are other people, many people, who have gone to jail for tax evasion. There are many people who have also gone to jail. It's not as common, but there are people who have certainly been convicted of falsely signing federal forms in the process of trying to obtain a firearm. So he wasn't singled out. We can also talk about how all this came to be, which was essentially launched off by the sort of first impeachment investigation into Donald Trump, which led to questions of Biden and a trip to Ukraine and Hunter's Burisma stuff. But however it came to be, the way that this process proceeded, for the most part, to the extent we have an idea of what happened in the Department of Justice, it was accusations that he was being treated leniently, not that he was being targeted. And to suggest in retrospect that he was singled or targeted is just nuts. On
the gun charge and the lying on the federal form, the argument is from the president, well, look, he was an addict, and that sort of thing was just, essentially a technical filing violation. I can actually understand why the president thinks that was maybe a particular overreach, particularly the felony conviction of it. But on the tax side of it, Kyle, I mean, there's no question, as Kim suggested, there was millions of dollars worth of income that they moved around into different accounts, and then he essentially didn't report it. Now, the president says in his statement, those who were late paying their taxes because of serious addictions, but paid them back subsequently with interest and penalties, are typically given non-criminal resolutions. It is clear that Hunter was treated differently. Sorry, that isn't what happens. If it's a case of what looks to be willful hiding of income, they charge you. Kyle.
Let me start with the gun charge, because I think there's more context there that can also be added. I mean, the president's statement is that this is not a charge that is often brought without aggravating factors. And I tend to agree with you that some kind of plea deal on that maybe would have been within the normal range that you would expect. But there were extenuating, aggravating factors here. I mean, the one reason that this is rarely charged is that if someone who is using illegal drugs buys a firearm and lies on the federal form and keeps the firearm in his basement for the next 10 years, I mean, there's no way to even discover that a crime was committed. But here we have a situation where first Hunter Biden had that gun for only 11 days. His then girlfriend took the gun, threw it in a trash can behind a grocery store across from a high school. And then the Delaware cops went looking for it because they were worried that the gun might have gone missing, could be used in a crime later. And then, by the way, he wrote a very prominent memoir, essentially all but confessing to his drug use during this period. So the extenuating circumstance is a pretty open and shut case there. On the tax charge, I tend to agree also. And some of the testimony from the IRS investigators about this charge points to willfulness. One of these investigators is saying that in 2020, when Hunter was reportedly sober, working on his memoir, he was signing off on returns for his 2018 tax year, and those included, business deductions that were not true, that were allegedly falsified. And so the excuse from President Biden on the tax stuff is that Hunter was an addict, and that's a reason for leniency. People generally get those things resolved without federal crimes. But the testimony from the IRS here is that there's suggestions of real willfulness past the period when he was supposed to be sober.
Kim, the most accurate statement in the president's statement, the most accurate sentence is, I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision, unquote, to pardon his son. I can understand that. I really can. I know a lot of our listeners might disagree with that and say this is a gross miscarriage of justice, but I thought he was going to pardon him all along. Joe Biden feels enormously guilty about the things that have happened to Hunter. He feels personally responsible in some way for subjecting Hunter to the burdens that come with being the son of a president. He feels terrible about the fact that his other son, Bo, died of cancer, and that Hunter seemed to spiral after Bo's death. So he was always going to do this. But what I really reject is the attempt to rewrite history of these convictions. And for example, the plea deal point I made earlier, Kim, that he says the plea deal unraveled in the courtroom. Well, yeah, it unraveled all right. The judge refused to accept it. That's not just unraveling, that's the judge rejecting it.
Right, because let's not forget that original plea deal was a slap on the wrist that was arguably different. Whether or not you thought Hunter Biden should go to jail for this gun offense, what the deal he was getting in that court was so unusual, so surprising, even to the judge, she could not sign off on it. She's like, since when has there ever been a scenario like this? I've certainly never come across it before, because essentially what Hunter was asking for in that plea deal is, I want no jail time, nothing really on my record, and I want a free get out of jail card for anything going forward as well, too, if there are other things that the prosecutors are looking at. And the judge said, I cannot accept that. And they refused to back down or negotiate. That's how that fell apart in the courtroom. I totally agree with you, Paul. Look, I think that if Joe Biden had from the start of this entire episode been more honest and direct with the American people that his son had a major drug problem, that the family had gone to great lengths to help him, that things had spiraled out of control, that he felt the love a father feels for his son. And that's how you ended up in a pardon. And that's how what he described it at the very end. I think people would be compassionate about that. But you have to remember the long history of this too. Joe Biden standing on a debate stage in 2020 claiming that Hunter Biden's laptop was the work of Russian disinformation when he knew that was not true, and denying all along he ever had any role in his son's business, which we also know is not true. And it leaves a just very kind of stinky feeling instead of a president who was, for whatever reason, had an involvement in a very shady set of business dealings that his son was engaged in using the family name, helped kind of cover that up from a political sense. And now we end with a pardon. And, I wonder to what extent this might define his presidency as we go down the road.
Really? You think it could be that defining?
I think it's more than an asterisk. I think it's something that, he came into office with the debate over Hunter and this scandal and the laptop, and he leaves by pardoning his son.